Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about contract negotiations and their critical importance in pharma with my guest, Dr Roxana Timmermans. Roxana, who has a PhD in chemistry, has extensive experience in strategic pharmaceutical supply chain management and global sourcing. She's an expert in negotiating sustainable partnerships that streamline operations, optimize costs, and enhance global access to life-saving treatments, with a particular focus on external contract manufacturing partners.
The PharmaSource podcast is sponsored by Thermo Fisher Scientific. Thermo Fisher Scientific provides industry-leading pharma services for drug development, clinical trial logistics, commercial manufacturing, and clinical research. They partner with customers in the pharmaceutical, biotech, and life sciences industries as their trusted CDMO to deliver medicine to patients faster.
Back to our interview with Dr. Roxana Timmermans. To begin with, I asked her why contract negotiations are such an important area.
Thank you. I do believe very much that somehow the negotiation itself, it is seen as a game of power in the contract manufacturing. And it is truly just a collaboration and nothing more. There is not a giver and a taker. If any negotiation has an outcome. It's a deal, it is a contract most of the time, it is a supply agreement. And if there is this element of win-win missing, the possibility of a long-term relationship is very low. So as soon as things that are not properly negotiated in both favors, right, there is not a true for both parties, but there is something that you probably may want more than I wanted, and there is a proper, decent, and trustworthy exchange. Negotiation skills in the pharma contract manufacturing are absolutely vital, because you need to establish terms. Terms have to be very clear, especially in such a regulated industry as pharmaceutical industry. You need to ensure quality compliance, and you have to be able to really write this down in order to be able to measure, because really what you can measure, you have it done, right? You need to be able to manage costs. You need to be able to manage all the portion of the contracts on the liabilities, so the expectations, right? You need to balance the risks and the opportunities and to have it documented. Now, literally a proper negotiation, it's having the foundation on a strong partnership. The partnership, you can already see it from the moment where the negotiation starts. There will always be some critical tensions, but the job of the negotiators from both parties, it is really to align, to advocate for their organizations in order to establish this win-win conversation, which will give afterwards, a possibility of the long-term arrangement, the long-term partnership. This is what we see in negotiations, right, with other parties. There is a huge part that is hidden in negotiations. For example, if I'm negotiating with you, Luke, for whatever arrangement we want to have in the future, there is a portion of the demands I will make to you that you do not know where this is coming from. And usually it's coming from your own organization, right? So there is, I would say the negotiator, it's always in the middle. It's in a sandwich between, the outside world, the negotiating party, and also the inside world, where you need to align your stakeholders in order to support your negotiation. Otherwise, you are not going to be successful.
You've got very broad experience in this from both sides of the fence, both from the supplier side in your time at companies such as Patheon Dr. Reddy's, Rona, and also then from the other side of the fence when you were negotiating the contracts at Bristol Myers Squibb, Biogen. From your experience at seeing both sides of it, I'd be really interested to know any examples you've got of where it doesn't work. What are the things which cause friction and misalignment between the two parties?
Depending very much on what the manufacturing agreement is, there are different manufacturing agreements, but literally it depends on what is the statement of work, what that agreement covers, in terms of work. For example, for a biologics drug substance, a contract would look completely different in terms of capacity, forecasting, liabilities. It's going to look completely different than what is going to look on a packaging supply agreement or even a sterile drug product, vials and syringes, supply agreement. There is, though, the same reaction everywhere, every time. There are some commonalities. One of them, it is the COGS, cost of goods. They are important, and I think folks, I never understood why this is the case. You just go into the contract negotiations, you have been running a sourcing exercise in the brightest details, right? And you have been choosing to go with that supplier based, obviously, on the cost as well. And it's coming up over and over again in the contract negotiations. When you are setting the tier pricing, for example, based on the capacity, most of the time, the procurement negotiator will want to have some changes. And I personally find this, it's like you are waking up, you had the train to catch at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you are waking up at 8 o'clock in the morning. The SBB here in Switzerland, for example, so the guys which are running the railways are not going to return that train for you in order for you to make it at 8 o'clock in the morning. So it's coming as well, and again, it is an element of respect. And I think we all should know our inquiries limits, right? There are things that contract manufacturing is able to give you, and there are things they can't because they have hundreds of customers, right? For sure, medium-sized companies like the sterile manufacturing in Germany or the other ones in the US, they have for sure over 120 customer base. So they simply have to have a standardized set of values. For example, a liability cannot be higher. A liability is practically the penalty they have to pay you back in case something is going wrong, in case a batch is destroyed or the raw materials are not taken care of, if there is a cyber security threat. If anything is happening, they have to be protected, and they are protected to a certain extent under insurance, but they can't cover the entire risk, right? So let me give you a very concrete example. If you have to manufacture a monoclonal antibody, or even worse, an antibody drug conjugate, which is so difficult to manufacture, the starting materials, I will not even go into cell and gene therapy, which is completely another story. And the supply agreements look, again, completely different because the life cycle is much more accelerated and you have to be able to act. And if the contract sometimes is stopping you acting, right? Because you have to go through the steps of arbitration, for example. So coming back to the example of monoclonal antibodies or antibody drug conjugates, the initial raw materials are extremely expensive. If anything is happening to that raw materials, first of all, it's impacting your supply, and sometimes the CMO, the contract manufacturing organization, cannot cover the entire cost. Or if something is happening during the production and the pharmaceutical company has all the rights to be very upset and to complain, because it's impacting the patients at the end of the day, right? Or the inventory levels, which are very important for any biopharmaceutical company. The contract manufacturing cannot stand for the entire amount of what the batch would have costed, right? For example, an antibody drug conjugate batch of, let's say, at 5,000 liters, not an antibody drug conjugate, I would say one step before, the monoclonal antibody, before you conjugate it with the cytotoxic small molecule. Something like this, a monoclonal antibody batch, depending obviously on the process, it costs for 5,000 liters in between 3 million to maybe 6 million US dollars. So it is terribly expensive, right? The contract manufacturing, if anything, if there is any failure on that batch, the contract manufacturing organization, it's simply not able to cover the entire value of the batch. Because if 2-3 batches are happening like this, they will simply run out of the business, run out of cash.
Do you ever see contract manufacturers who have said that they will do that? Perhaps they were under pressure in order to secure a contract and they have put themselves in unwise situations like that financially.
I have never seen in the biologic space. I think if I were to run a contract manufacturing organization, that would be a no-go, because it's just a matter of time to bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And if folks are finding out that you are doing this with one customer, then it becomes, the demand for all the rest as well.
Difficult conversation to have as a client with your superiors.
Thank you so much. It's exactly right. I have been hearing and having tremendous pressure from the stakeholders on recouping the entire losses, and even additional penalties, because it's impacting the supply. And that's why it is so important that we understand the entire picture, right? And I'm a big advocate of pen and paper. I'm a big advocate. You will see me in all the negotiations with a whiteboard, going and write them down. So I believe you immediately. If you are telling me it's true, I just wanted to have it written down, because on that moment you see the entire picture. You can't tell me, hey, give me 3 million and it's done deal and let's close the contract. Maybe 3 million is not enough. Maybe it's too much. Maybe it's too little. So, and there are different type of penalties, right? Different type of liabilities. If you have recall, it's quite a big deal, right, for a biopharmaceutical company. What are you going to do? Are you going to inquire again the entire value? No, that company has to cap themselves. They have to protect themselves, and they will give you something, to be punished as a sign of punishment, but they will definitely not cover the entire value. I think it is also, that's what I said before, that the negotiator is in the middle. It is my job, our jobs, especially in procurement, to make it very clear to the stakeholders, and that pressure, that these are the limits of the negotiations.
Yep.
It's the best you can do, and this is the worst you can do. And with these limits, you have to make it work. But again, the pen and paper, the fact that you go there with facts and data and put all the emotion and your wishes aside, and the stakeholders' wishes aside, I think the fact that people are, I never, literally never, have been unsuccessful when I have been sending my Excel file or a presentation before a negotiation. I promise you that presentation has been open, and they have been said, Roxana, we can give you 0.1, 4, and 6 out of 7 points, but we cannot. We have to negotiate 2, 3, because this is too extreme for us.
And what goes into that presentation that you send before a negotiation? What are the typical things that you lay out in advance?
So there are some things which are very important depending on the project, right? It's very important for the company, and it is our job to protect that piece. Most of the time, again, depending on the platform technologies, again, to make a monoclonal antibody is probably taking 6 to 8 months, okay? So it's taking a huge amount of time. So you need to plan and replan accordingly, as you have to provide the demand forecast accordingly. So that I would, in that moment, the capacity reservations, for example, will look completely different Then if we are looking for a pill or a capsule, or even a packaging, where there is much more flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
What do I put on that presentation? The most important are, what is the most important for you? I'm calling these major points in a contract with a big M, and minor points in the contracts. Major points are the points which are just increasing the risk based on that contract, that supply contract, are increasing the risk of your pharmaceutical company to a level that it becomes extremely dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is an entire mechanism behind that risk. Any contract which is increasing the risk of the company corporate is going to alarm, the auditors, is going to be, because it has to be SOX compliance, it's going to be heavily investigated, and is going to impact, the treasury and the cash flow practically, because you need to keep. It's the same for the contract manufacturing organizations. When the risk is very high, you need to have, let me put it very simple, enough money in the bank to be able to pay the penalties or immediately to replace that batch.
Mm.
So that presentation contains what is super important for, depending on the project, and definitely, zones where we can negotiate things that are important, but I am able to negotiate, or I'm willing to negotiate, to discuss, not to negotiate. And better we say, we should remove this negotiate, to negotiate. We love it so much, but in the fact it is to collaborate, to discuss it, collaborate, because it is a collaboration, right? At the end of the day.
It should be, yeah.
So this is what I would put in on the presentations, and definitely, especially from the procurement side, you always go there with the calculator. You always go
Yes.
there with, something that you can calculate immediately, because you have to be also prepared sometimes of surprises.
So what would you say the key elements are for a good contract manufacturing contract? What would you say those main points are that you'd want to cover?
So they are, I would call them three pillars, right?
Okay.
This is how I like to design it in my head. First of all, it is the technical or technological piece. You have to have the statement of work, what it is, what's the product, how much you want from it, the quantities, the specifications, the markets, super important, because you need to, this is highly regulated industry. You need to have the GMP, all the quality control standards. Then you will have, did I say, the supply chain part, all the minimum order quantities, all the tiers that you want, or the campaigning, for example. You might have this because you have some advantages. If you are campaigning, the prices should go down. Then you have the regulatory and the other part, all the innovations, continuous improvement, the sustainability piece, right? The EHS, which is very important as well. Then you have a second pillar, which I would call the obligations, right?
Okay.
Obligations is like the third party IP liability, super, super important. What is happening in a case of a recall? How the governance is working in these extreme cases. And definitely you have indemnifications, you have liabilities, which are multiple types, as I said before. And there is another third pillar, which I call, the typical, you would see this in any contracts, the payment terms, in how many days I have to pay the supplier, Incoterms, how is that shipment delivered? Very important as well, dispute resolutions, chain management, and the term and termination, which, to my surprise, many people are forgetting about this. The term probably not, but the termination provisions, it's super important, and I don't really understand how this can be forgotten. Because with all the look at mergers and acquisitions and what is happening today, right? If you are changing the control of a company, that, is not a given that you have a legacy of the contracts, right?
It's a very fast-moving landscape at the moment.
Yeah. So this would be, high level, the elements I would have in contract.
Talking about that point about why are people missing out really important things from contracts, what do you think about the value of education in contract negotiations? So companies training their employees, giving them best practices, playbooks, investing in education. Is that important? And if so, is it done enough?
I personally believe this is paramount. I absolutely believe anything we are learning, reading, you had the books to read. So you can just watch how others are doing. I'm telling you from my own experience, until you do not go and sit on that table and see the human beings' reactions and understand so many cultural differences, so many needs a company has completely different than yours. I don't think, plus there are a lot of technicalities, right, that negotiation requires. There are very specific elements in negotiation. Some of us know it, some others don't. And if you don't, that means you are not trained. And that means you will put the company in a very damaging position just because you do not know. So the fact that the companies should invest in contract negotiation skills, or even how the contract looks like, we are expecting all the legal counselors give me the template, make templates. This is again a collaboration in between, interdivisionals of a pharmaceutical company. And my opinion is that procurement should really have a heavy hand into these templates, because one of the reasons you have been asking why they are forgotten is because, the legal counselor, the representative, may not think that liability, or the recall liability is important. But you as a procurement representing the business and knowing what product you want to manufacture should be the one raising your hand and mentioning this is very important. If you know it, and to know it, you have to be trained.
Yeah.
And there is another aspect. I think I have seen this recently where I don't think the impact of a good contract, it's understood enough, at the higher levels, right, if I may, of the stakeholders. I believe strongly that because everyone is thinking, I don't want to have a contract with you. It doesn't matter. We put it in a shelf and we never take it again, right? Because we have to make it work. But then why do you have that paper? We can have emails, right? When things are not going right and it's not your fault and it's not my fault, whose fault is then? How do you fix this? I mean, this is a business relationship. A business relationship, it is defined at least on the planet Earth, far as I know, with something in written so that you are protected and I am protected. And if we don't know how to write this, it's going to come a moment of chaos, and the relationships, how would I call this? The win-win will disappear. As soon as there is something going wrong, when everything goes right, nobody is going to care. And that contract, nobody is going to look into it. But you have the contract in case something is not going to be that successful as the marriage. When you started the marriage and you were very in love, because you never thought this going to be, a breakup. Never, ever. And well, it happens 20 years later or 30 years later. So that's the same situation.
Get a prenup agreed right from the start. How do you benchmark? How do you benchmark and compare contract manufacturers when you've got a network of more than one contract manufacturer that you're working with? How do you tend to do that?
Again, you go back to, what is important, very important to you. A couple of years back, I have been working with a very known contract manufacturing organization in the sterile and the aseptic space. Excuse me. And they literally said it from moment zero. So the project was not even awarded to them. But when they have been running, the sourcing event, they said, look, I want you to know these are 5 elements we cannot give up to. We cannot negotiate. If you take these 5 elements, but I need to have 90% of it, you decide right now, right here, if you can work with us or not. And nobody's losing the time. I love this. The fact that they were capable to articulate what it was important for them. They were not breaching what it is important for me. So as a conclusion, we could work together. It has been a fantastic, literally fantastic collaboration since that day. But we set the stage, the expectations very early on. And we have been keeping that expectations and keeping ourselves accountable each other for what we promise that we are going to do. So if you have such a good collaboration, is going to give you a very good contract. And then probably is going to be your benchmark contract. And then you will see that some of the elements which are very important for you are missing in other contracts, or you had to, I would call give up or obey to some other elements simply because you needed that capacity or you needed that technology and you needed so badly to be first on the market that you had to bend to one of the elements which were not impacting the supply, for example, but probably would impact the financials later on. That's why the contracts are renegotiated. Normally you have a contract of 3 to 5 years. I have seen contracts on 10 years, which in today's world, I think that was possible 10 years ago. Today, I would see this very risky. But again, you have a set of elements. You have to check versus that element, the elements of each of the contracts you have. And then, I even made a couple of months ago, I even made such an analysis. That's why I love the question, because I could quantify the quality of the contracts in percentages. I had my best wish. I had my, let's call it template. I knew what I wanted, what would be the perfect scenario for me. And then I had the contracts analyzing them based on what I said, the elements before. And you had something which was completely unacceptable. You could not manage. You struggled every single month with providing the forecast. You had to run to give them bias, and this is not acceptable. And you had something, other suppliers or other contracts that you could very well work with. And based on this, you see where your gaps are. And if it's fantastic tool practically, because if that suppliers that has a less than 50%, I would call it 60% acceptability, if the quality of that contract, it's again 60% and not higher, and if that supplier has repetitive supply assurance issues, right? Doesn't matter if it's quality, if it is logistics, shipment, whatever it is, then this is a supplier you absolutely need to reconsider if you are going to continue to work with or remove it and be replaced. And that's another part of the strategic procurement role, which I absolutely respect and value.
At CDMO Live in June, you're going to be talking about sustainability and how you can build sustainability into your contract manufacturing relationship and some of the different levers that you can pull to make it more efficient, more sustainable. I wonder if you could just touch on that a bit, and how do you build those sustainability considerations into the contract from the start? Where does sustainability fit in with all of the other long list of requirements and KPIs and benchmarks?
You implement it from the beginning. It's what I said about this supplier, the aseptic supplier, right? They came and they said, these are my 5 elements, I won't give up to it. The sustainability piece, you absolutely implement it on the sourcing already at the very, very, very beginning. So I designed a new request for proposals, how we call it. And it was one entire tab full of questions. I know it's, very boring for the one that has to feel that, but it's so important because based on the sustainability provisions. So my expectation in the future, right now, in the fact, from any contract manufacturing organization is if they don't have already an alternative energy source, to have at least a plan by when this is going to be deployed.
Mm.
I would prefer that they have an immediate plan and they have already started the implementation, rather than the implementation is going to take place when my technology transfer is hitting, the end and the filing starts, because it's a risk, right? Everything that is happening in parallel, it might impact my supply, the other suppliers, the other customers. So if you are building this from the sourcing initially, it is very, very easy to pull this out as a provision and obligation for the contract manufacturing organizations in any contract.
Mm-hmm.
And it is also an ambition. Sometimes you have to help that contract manufacturing. And we have been in the situations where we had to advise, we had to help them, we had to share even energy, which I find very beautiful as well.
Mm.
We had to advise on, what are the innovative solutions, because what is sustainable for me might not be sustainable for you.
Mm.
So you have to have that conversation, right? You have some rules given by the authorities, and we all have to obey the rules. But there are also projects at the individual corporate level where people are just trying to optimize their own production while remaining sustainable. And this is something probably the pharmaceutical companies do not always know, because this is not the project that you're really advertised.
That's very interesting how you were
Yeah.
saying that in one of these relationships, you were sharing power with them as well, because that goes far beyond the typical buyer supplier relationship. And it seems like a much more complex partnership that you're striking there.
Oh, I believe so much, and I have seen so beautiful things happening. In order for us to innovate, I'm a strong believer that it should not be competition. It should be creation. If you really want to change something, stop competing with anyone else. And
Mm.
funny enough, most of the biopharmaceutical companies have their own internal manufacturing sites. It is absolutely normal, right? It is the risk mitigation
Yep.
mechanism, but there should not be a competition in between an internal side with an external side. I even had recently a discussion. The KPIs should be the same. Today, the site's KPIs internally are still different than what we are asking suppliers to measure.
Mm.
And to some extent, towards the payments and towards the um, payment terms, and yeah, of course, because you don't pay necessarily except intra corporate transactions, right? But the rest of the quality attributes should be the same. And even the forecasting, why should we ask the supplier to, give us any other KPI than what we are measuring internally? Why would that be any different? So I believe very much in the collaboration, and the competition should completely disappear from our vocabulary, because it's not going to bring us anywhere. And just look around what's happening in the world, because we are competing for energy, for food. And granted, there are folks not having, there's nothing to compete there. And instead of us trying to get cheaper and better and 100 million type of yogurts, okay,
Mhm.
in the store, which nobody needs, right? I mean, we should focus on, I don't know, 5, 6, and then invest the rest into creating and innovating so that everyone has a possibility. And that's why I have seen, for example, that has been, especially in the COVID, and I think COVID did a fantastic job on that moment, because we were so united by pain. We were so desperate to survive, but not alone. We were
Mm.
so bothered that we could not shake a hand and we could not see the families. That I think it has been triggering something inside of us to understand the power of to collaborate. So you were grateful when you did not have the mask to enter the shop and somebody just handed you a mask, because that's
Mm.
what humans are doing, right? And we were grateful when you did not have something to disinfect your hands and somebody has been giving you that. So I think, and I see this more and more, but post-COVID, I have seen an explosion of collaborations, and because people were collaborating just to see how interesting. So when the COVID was done, right, 2022, we are 2024, 2 years later, because we started to collaborate, that means, not to compete, collaborate, innovate. See what's happening with the artificial intelligence, right? It's just booming everything, and everyone wants to understand how to speed up, how to help the world, how to address really problems. So it's very important. So that means that this collaboration has been giving the opportunity of an artificial intelligence investment to innovate.
Very interesting. Talking about that spirit of open collaboration and bringing down walls between internal manufacturing and external manufacturing. In reality, I'm sure there's still a lot of politics and vested interests between different companies or internal departments and things like that. In your experience, what's the best way to sort of cut through all of that and try to deliver the best result for the patient at the end of the day, to really sort of drive a positive agenda for collaboration when you do face those types of obstacles?
It's an interesting question. I literally have been in this situation where 80% of a very, very important cancer blockbuster was designed automatically for the internal manufacturing, with 20% being externalized, 20% of the production of the entire worldwide annual production. And that 20% simply could not secure the business continuity. It was simply not enough, to create a business continuity model, because think a second, if something has been happening on the 80% site, which did, right? It has been a huge hurricane, completely ravaged the Iceland, and then you had to immediately find solutions which were not there. Because in 80%, if you are keeping the capacity for 20%, you simply are not capable to push in that 20% capacity, the 80% you need as a business continuity. So the answer to your question, based on experience, in my opinion, again, depending on the platform technologies, you have to look of a decent 50-50%. You need to look, and supply chain managers know this very well. That has to be a planning that is making sense, because sometimes your contract manufacturing organization has a massive cost advantage on the raw materials, whatever, compared to you. Because a previous company, for example, would make maybe 100 million syringes internally, but then a contract manufacturing for that specific product probably will make 600 million syringes. So they will simply buy the empty syringes much better with a much competitive price of 600 millions compared to 100 millions, right? So you have to look at the entire ecosystem, what it is beneficial for the supplier and for you. And every time, every year you have to look, how is that changing? The 50-50% is not set in stone. It might be this year 40-60, next year it might be 75-25. It depends very much. That's why, again, the contract negotiations are so important, because it's allowing you this flexibility.
Roxana, thank you so much for your time today. Really fascinating speaking to you, and looking forward to your session at CDMO Live.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And I will see you in June. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you to Dr. Roxana Timmermans. As we mentioned, she'll be speaking at CDMO Live in June, where she'll be talking about revolutionising contract manufacturing through green outsourcing. You can register to the event for free by heading to pharmasource.global/CDMO Live. Thank you for listening. And a thank you to our sponsor, Thermo Fisher Scientific.